Mitsui & Co has been in Australia longer than any of us. In fact, Mitsui has been in Australia since Federation in 1901, so 114 years. In the early days, Mitsui was exporting wool, grains and metals and other items such as fabric, jute and timber. Today, Mitsui & Co is one of the world's most diversified trading, investment and service enterprises. In Australia, it is particularly strong in mining, having expanded into coal and then iron ore. The Mitsui Group of companies has invested over $14 billion in Australia in the last 10 years. It is a long-term investor here and is a founding partner in major pioneering joint ventures. Today, we are to hear from Mitsui & Co, Australia's Chairman and CEO, who has responsibility for both Mitsui's Australia and New Zealand operations, Takahashi-san. He has been in his present position, based in Melbourne, for just on 2 years. He has a broad international outlook. He graduated in law from Japan's Keio University and has completed a Harvard Business School program for global leadership. Takahashi-san has held many senior positions in Mitsui, all relating to mining activities, in particular coal and iron ore. His past experience includes time in North and South America in metal resources business, 9 years living in New York, a year in London. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Yasushi Takahashi.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, for heart-melting introductions. She knows better than me. What else I can speak? Well, but anyway, the Honorable Willie D'Ambrosio, Minister for Industry, Energy and Resources of the State of Victoria, Ms. Keiko Haneda, Consul General of Japan, Sir Avi Pavo, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am Yasushi Takahashi, CEO of Mitsui Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. It's a great honor for me to share the story of our involvement in Australia's mining industry at the reputed Melbourne Mining Club, here in the heartland of this most important national industry. Today, I'd like to talk about 4 themes in my speech. First, Mitsui's unique business models and strategies. Second, our history in Australia and how we have grown over time. Third, a few episodes that tell our deep involvement to Australia's mining industry. And lastly, our current focus on innovation in mining. Firstly, let me touch on Mitsui's unique business model. 2 key words and strategies are diversity and synergies. Let's look at the size of our global operations. Mitsui's total assets are more than 100 billion US. Shareholders' equity is about 35 billion US. And EBITDA is about 8 billion. And our net profit is around 3 to 4 billion US. Annual investment and loans are about 10 billion US. But most importantly, our businesses, mainly B2B, are quite diversified. The commodities we invest in and trade range from metals, it includes mineral resources, steel, and non-ferrous metals, and machinery and infrastructure, chemicals, energy, lifestyle including food and food resources, consumer services, to financial products. Also, we do businesses in 65 countries from 140 offices around the world, more than the All-Trade network. Our unique diversity also lies in the quality and number of our partners and customers. Just in Australian resources sector alone, we have many joint ventures with BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, Anglo American, Woodside, Santos, and other key players. Now, I'd like to talk about our strategy. We are not concentrating our management resources into any specific industry or region, but we maintain our diversity by operating in range of key sectors. And also, in many of our projects, we are content to hold a minority stake and let trustworthy partners operate projects, while we actively contribute by supplementing their functions effectively and harmoniously. What then is our value proposition? Our core strategy is to combine our extensive expertise accumulated in diversified industries or regions and generate synergies and opportunities for our partners and customers. To provide one example, we are now promoting the uptake of gas in place of diesel in mining operations. The Australian mining industry is paying billions of dollars annually for diesel fuel, but we can achieve great savings if CNG or LNG replace diesel, which we believe is possible in the near future. Why is Mitsui pursuing this? Because we are in the best position to promote such a conversion through our deep involvement in all of LNG, line pipes, gas distribution, infrastructure projects, mining equipment, and the mining industry itself. Having diversified businesses, we cover the whole value chain. And by combining our expertise in each business, we can act as a catalyst for a more cost-effective and efficient outcome. This very much sums up our business model. And our philosophy since our foundation is to contribute the absolute most to the nation building of the countries in which we operate. Secondly, I'd like to talk about Mitsui's long and proud history here in Australia. The former Mitsui established its first office in Sydney in 1901, as Lorraine kindly referred to. It's a year of Australian Federation. As shown in the newspaper article, Melbourne was our second office in 1917, so we are 98 years old here. And I will have to add that we have shifted our headquarters functions from Sydney to Melbourne 2 years ago. Brisbane was our third office in 1934, and Perth was the last in 1964. Few global companies could claim this level of history and commitment to the Australian community, I think. In 1950s and 60s, we were involved in the coal industry as a pioneering investor and marketer for many coal projects. In Queensland's first export coal mine, Maura, currently called Dawson, we fully funded exploration works, invited partners to organize a joint venture, and marketed the coal to Japan, the largest importer of Australian coal even now. And in 1960s and 70s, we did the same for iron ore industry in Western Australia by playing the founding investor and marketer role in Mount Newman and Roe River. In 1970s and 80s, again we pioneered in developing salt and LNG industries in Western Australia, namely Shark Bay Salt and Northwest Shelf. In these businesses, we are honored to have participated in the building of Australia's resources sector. And while many other partners have come and gone, we have continued to stay in each project, functioning as an anchoring partner. In Roe River's case, we made losses for the first 9 years in a row. You can imagine how difficult it was for Mitsui not to exit. But I would say this long-term view is the strength of Mitsui, in it for the long haul. With this long-term view in mind, we have expanded our investments and trading in many other sectors here. This map shows the diversity in our Australian operations. It's truly a microcosm of Mitsui's global diversified businesses. Our export of in-kind equity amounts to $8 billion, ranked as number 4 Australian exporter, and we actively maintain major positions in Australia's key export commodities as shown below of this slide. Total investments made in Australia over the last 10 years were more than $14 billion, and we are in the top list of global investors to Australia. And for Mitsui, Australia is our largest destination of investments, greater than that of USA, EU, Brazil, China, Russia, and Indonesia. Therefore, Australia is the most important country for Mitsui, and we are firmly committed to this country of which mining and resources are the core. Thirdly, let me share a few stories of decades ago. These stories not only illustrate our long and deep involvement in Australia's mining industry, but also our willingness to overcome difficulties. Also, I should add that I experienced these episodes by myself as a young iron ore man in Mitsui. The first story is called Power Switch, a revolution of industrial relations that started from Roe River and spread across the whole mining industry in 1980s. The then management of Roe River had suffered from operational stoppages caused by strikes, and unions strengthened demarcations and restrictive work practices in mining operations, using strikes as their bargaining power. In May 1986, power supply to the Rome community was cut off due to a substation fault. So the superintendent pressed the power switch to reset the breaker and successfully restore the power supply to the community. During this incident, there was nobody from ETU available, since everyone was on a 24 hours national strike led by ACTU. Later, ETU found out what the superintendent did, but didn't thank him. Why? Because ETU believed nobody other than ETU tradesmen should touch a power switch. They got upset and demanded the company to suspend him for 5 days without pay. The company firstly resisted, but finally suspended him for 2 days without pay. The ETU claimed the suspension wasn't enough at all and went on another strike for 6 days. Charles Cotman, the then CEO of PICO, which owned 53% stake of the joint venture, looked at the incidents and decided to take back control of operations from the unions. It was indeed a pursuit of power switch of operations from union to the management. The battle was tense and Rove suffered from months of stoppages. But finally, Charles was able to abolish restrictive work practices and contracted individual workers, introducing a productivity bonus scheme. The result was drastic. Within 30 months, Rove's labor productivity jumped up by 3.5 times, the costs became the lowest, and steel workers were paid the most in the region. Ultimately, this revolution spread to the whole Pilbara region, then to coal mines in eastern states. In those days, major customers for Pilbara iron ore mines were Japanese steel mills. With such long stoppages, they severely complained about Rove's non-deliveries. But Mitsui, the longest partner in Rove's joint venture, understood that Charles' challenge was necessary for Rove, for Pilbara, and for Australia. Mitsui supported Charles in those difficult days and tirelessly persuaded Japanese mills not to penalize Rove. As a result, Rove wasn't penalized by the mills, even though they couldn't deliver the contractual tonnages. Sadly, Charles passed away 2 years ago, but I believe he is remembered as one of the most respected by MMC members and as an old friend of Mitsui. The next episode centers on innovation to use iron ore with higher combined water. In Pilbara, the majority of the first iron ore developed in 1960s was top-grade hematite mines like Mount Whaleback, Mount Tom Price, and Paraburu. But from 1990s, when some of the top-grade reserves came close to depletion, the second-generation development started, mainly Mara Mamba and Paisley, both of which contain higher combined water in ore molecules. Yandi, West Angeles, and mining area C are all among these categories. Naturally, high combined water causes lower productivity and higher fuel consumption in the sintering process. And no steel mill in the world has successfully consumed Mara Mamba or Paislite as their major feed for sinter in those days. But Japanese steel mills, acknowledging that good hematite would soon be depleted, started to try increasing the feed of higher combined water ore to sinter, and they finally reached a breakthrough during the early 1990s. Mitsui believed it was important to take this breakthrough to the emerging market of China to enhance the position of Pilbara. In the 90s, we started marketing and technical interactions of those ores to China, together with the Japanese mill and North. The foundations of Chinese mill to consume lots of Mara Mamba and Paislite from Pilbara started with these efforts. We are proud to have taken our role in these hidden but epoch-making evolutions as the oldest partner in each joint venture. Lastly, I'd like to touch on a current issue of Australian mining, its productivity. This graph shows Australia's mining industry's productivity over 25 years, published by ABS. As shown, since 2000, mining productivity has shown a sharp drop in both labor and capital. Looking at industry-wide labor productivity over the past 10 years in Australia, the mining industry recorded minus 37% and ranks the worst. Looking at capital productivity, the mining industry recorded minus 40% in the same period and ranked second from the worst. What happened to Australian mining over the last decade? During the super cycle triggered by Chinese demand growth, we just focused on increasing the production and capacity. We made bold investments in capital and increased the labor force as much as possible without examining the costs, systematic efficiency, or productivity. Naturally, our mining costs jumped up and productivity deteriorated, but we could enjoy the record profit on the back of soaring prices. These rosy-colored times are over. With expanded capacity and the slowing of Chinese demand, the supply-demand balance has softened and prices have fallen. Now, we are left to fix the problem of deteriorated productivity. To improve productivity, innovation is the key. In this regard, let me share with you some insights from the Autonomous Haulage System, or AHS, of Komatsu. I should add that Mitsui is a 40% equity owner of Komatsu Australia. To operate huge mining trucks, we need a minimum of 4 highly paid truck drivers per unit. And many may think that the biggest benefit of AHS is a reduction of truck drivers' cost. That's partly right, but the aim is not to get rid of jobs. It represents a relocation of workplace from the mining sites in harsh living conditions to the control center or universities in the city, which can enhance the productivity and improve the lifestyle for workers. In a bigger picture, it also reflects the transformation of mining to a high-tech industry. Moreover, there is a greater potential for further productivity gain. With AHS, trucks are operated on a standardized protocol designed to achieve the best driving with reduced fuel consumption and frequency of maintenance, both of which lead to lower cost than conventional manual driving. Furthermore, by analyzing the big data of trucks' movements, subtle factors such as the configuration of haul loads have a big influence on productivity and costs. If you can precisely temper the haul loads to have uniformity in surface flatness, soft inclination, or gentle curves, you can reduce fuel consumption and frequency of maintenance even further. Once mine operators openly exchange views on their mine planning with Komatsu, they can benefit from edge-cutting innovation to gain greater productivity. But innovation does not end at just AHS. Personally, I am deeply interested in the latest technology called smart construction, again developed by Komatsu. It intensely combines ICT and cloud computing technologies, and it can drastically improve many stages of mining operations in the future. In smart construction, firstly, a small helicopter with a 3D laser scanner called a drone flies around and measures the site configuration. While conventional procedures take 2 or 3 months, the drone does it all in 10 to 15 minutes. The 3D site data is immediately transferred to the cloud platform called ComConnect. And by comparing with the 3D completion model, construction plan is automatically computed. And for your reference, you have 2 options in mode setting: fastest completion or lowest cost. Then, the new developed ICT dozers and ICT shovels extract where to dig from ComConnect and automatically work when precisely placed at the location. With this innovation, work efficiency will be 4 or 5 times better than conventional way. Smart construction has been originally developed for general construction use, but I predict that it could be applicable to the mining industry and deliver huge potential productivity gains. Let me say at this juncture, though, that Mitsui is mostly about people. In fact, throughout our long history, our motto has been Mitsui is people. Our commitment to training people and improving society are linked goals that influence everything we do. Every year for 44 years, Mitsui Educational Foundation has been sending 8 Australian university students to Japan for a 3-week immersion program, exposing them to Japan's culture, history, business, lifestyle, and its relationship with Australia. More than 330 Australian students have visited Japan through this program. Many of them hold senior roles in the public and private sector and contribute in promoting the ties between Australia and Japan in their own individual way. More recently, we support the federal government's program of New Colombo Plan. We have provided tailored internship for 12 students from UTS and a scholar from UWS sent under the New Colombo Plan at our Tokyo headquarters. And we are honored that Mitsui's cooperation to the New Colombo Plan was introduced to the federal parliament in details by Minister Bishop last month. In closing, I would like to thank Australia for kindly hosting us for so many years. Let me say that we are firmly committed to the Australian mining industry for many years to come as more than just a partner. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you for that. Now, we have some time for some questions, so if you'd like to ask a question, if you could attract the attention of Gavin or Richard, and then grab the microphone, state your name and affiliation, and ask away. But let's ask questions, not make speeches if we can. Now, we've got one over here, I believe, in the centre. Thanks.
Hello, Richard Shoddy here from the Melbourne Mining Club Organising Committee. I have a very obvious question with regard to your presentation. You mentioned that Mitsui moved down from Sydney to Melbourne about 3 years ago. Could you explain the reasons why? Was it the football or was it the better weather?
Oh, maybe football? No. Well, actually, what happened was in our diversified portfolio of businesses, in Mitsui, Australia, we have about 9 business units here and there. And it's very easy to understand that one is iron ore located in Perth, and one is coal division located in Brisbane. But other 7 out of 7, about 10, 15 years ago, we have all of those divisions other than non-ferrous metals located in Sydney. However, as years goes by, each of the individual divisions voluntarily decided to move its location from Sydney to Melbourne. And about 3-4 years ago, there was only one division remaining in Sydney, that's chemicals, and all the other major business divisions moved to Melbourne. So now we came to have internal control issues. While the CEO and all of the corporate functions are lies in Sydney, we have majority of the business divisions in Melbourne. So after a lengthy of discussions, we have finally decided, in order to cope with the better internal control purposes, try to decide to, move the CEO and the corporate functions from Sydney to Melbourne. That happened 2 years ago. That's the story.
Warren Edney, Value Holst. As a major exporter from Australia, I wonder if you could give us some view about what the demand's like for your products from Australia, particularly in Japan.
Well, thank you very much for your good question. Actually, I think everybody knows that on and after 15th of January, Japan-Australia EPA has been affected, and that will be a huge boost in terms of the bilateral trade flow, especially for Australian exports like agricultural products like beef and wheat to Japanese market. So we are in the follow wind to enhance and grow the traditional and conventional export materials like food and food resources to Japan. So that's a good move. And as number one importer of wheat into the Japanese market, we already started to benefit from that. And I guess that all the other food-related businesses are enjoying those at the same time. But into the future, I would like to point out one of the potential huge field of services. Actually, both Australia and Japan is in the developed economy led by a huge percentage, like 70% out of the GDP in services sector. So if we can nicely stimulate both bilateral connections of those services sector, it will be a much greater to see more matured relationship in the trade flow and services flow. And one of the field is, as Minister Rolf is promoting, sightseers from Australia to Japan and from Japan to Australia. So I think those are the field we would like to focus on into the future.
Phil Clark from African Energy Resources. Takahashi-san, thank you very much for an informative and enjoyable presentation. You read overnight that Japan has opened 2 nuclear power stations just recently. Where do you see the future of the Japanese energy sector and maybe the opportunities for Australia?
Well, first of all, in terms of the best mix for Japan in terms of energy, it's a very difficult question. And actually, internally, there are much more, controversies, as you know. But one thing I would like to say from a business sector person is that we have to, take much of and not neglect the, heavy fact that from Japan we have exported a lot of, nuclear power generators to the other countries. We do have that responsibility, and we do have a responsibility to keep the technology edge cutting. That's one of the portion we don't have to neglect. And with regard to the uniformity in terms of the policy in energy mix between Japan and Australia, I'd like to share with you one very important scheme. Well, Japan is heavily dependent on coal-fired power generators, while Australia is one of the biggest coal exporters to Japan and to the world. So we are sharing the common interest to promote coal-fired power generators in a better shape to light and supply the energy sources to our emerging economies and to the world. But in order to do that, I think it is again, innovation is very important, like introducing the super critical coal-fired power generators, which will effectively reduce CO2 emissions and the other emissions drastically. So those are the common fields we can pursue together between Japan and Australia. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございました、Takahashi-san. Three things that are interesting to all of us here in the room: foreign exchange, the Australian dollar, coal price, and iron ore. Do you want to comment on each of those three from your perspective?
Well, thank you again for a good question. Well, actually, first of all, with regard to the Australian dollar, we are experiencing in a shorter cycle depreciation of Australian dollar compared to those of US dollars. And certainly, as kind of a global and international investors having a lot of assets here in Australia, which is deeply involved in the export side to a global market. We are benefiting from weaker Australian dollars as an exporter, major exporters. Okay, that's one part. And also in terms of considering the investment from outside into Australia, certainly weaker Australian dollars are benefiting us because the US dollar terms equity prices goes down. However, I would also say the most important thing is for us to have a criteria of the investment is not currency tendencies. We are having more longer term view, and we take much in the fitness of our strategy and long-term feasibility. Those are the things we are taking much of in terms of our investments. Secondly, with regard to iron ore coal prices, that's more difficult for me. Actually, as I have explained in the speech, we are too diversified. We are having interest and businesses here and there across the border of the boundary of each industries. And because of that, in this different portfolio of the diversified businesses with, let's say, steel mills, with the joint ventureship with resource companies, I'd like to decline to make any comment about the concrete prices in terms of the prediction of prices. Sorry for that.
Hi, I'm Anant from University of Melbourne, just a student. I was just wondering, as you mentioned in your talk, that you've got global operations. So what is your reasoning behind your continued heavy investment in Australia? And yeah, I was just interested in that.
Okay. Well, first of all, the most important thing I'd like to repeat is Australia is by far the most important country for Mitsui. In the longer run, in the past, and into the future too. Well, and the question is, asking why Australia is so important and so attractive for our investments. There are many numbers of the reasons. Well, number one, Australia is a great country for resources and mining. And we are very comfortable to be a founding member of Melbourne Mining Club. Yes, mining industry is very important for Australia. And mining products export is one of the core strategy, important part of the businesses for Australia. And considering the export from Australia, we can certainly, enhance, competitiveness of the Australian mineral resources. There are many, many countries, especially in the emerging Asian economies, who want eagerly the Australian resources, like mineral resources, energy, and food resources. So, in a diversified business portfolio, in one word, we are very much involved ourselves in those international trade flow. And because of that, we have a very good familiarity with Australia. And secondly, as I explained to you, we do have a lot of familiarity with Australia with our lengthy of experiences here. We have more than a century history counting from a former Mitsui. So we have accumulated, business expertise here and there, locally and horizontally. So because of that, we are having a great familiarity with the, business communities, government and local communities with Australia, and that's why. Thank you.
Now I'd just like to invite Patrick Smith from AMC to come and vote a formal vote of thanks and make a small presentation. Thank you.
Australia has a long and proud mining history, and some individuals and some companies have very strong name recognition in the mining industry. Individuals are oft remembered for their prominent role building mining companies or mineral deposit discoveries. Companies are likewise remembered for their successes. Mitsui's investment and so far half-century commitment to our mining industry has been a resounding financial success for Mitsui and a valuable contribution to Australia's prosperity. Mitsui's business model, foundation partnerships in long-life mining joint ventures, has made them a major but lesser-known Australian mining success. Could you all now please join me in thanking Takahashi-san for his presentation.